So today we're going to be focusing on vocabulary instruction. The reason that we're going to be focusing on vocabulary instruction is because it is one of the tools that will help our students better understand the text that we're trying to teach them every single day. Vocabulary is extremely important. Even when students are in kindergarten, if they do not have the vocabulary skills, it will predict that later on in middle school and in high school, they will struggle with comprehension. And especially for the students that we teach and the demographic that we teach in, we are at a disadvantage, and our students are at a disadvantage because of their vocabulary gap. So if you look at some of the statistics, by age 4, per month, students from welfare families are only hearing 500 words every single month, whereas students from professional families are hearing 1,100 words. So by the time that they're 3 years old, welfare students are only hearing 10 million words, and professional students are hearing 3 times that at 30 million words. And this really affects how well they do in school once they get to kindergarten, but even past that in middle school, high school, and beyond. And the gap in word knowledge really persists through the elementary schools, and it's a predictor of the struggling readers. So if you look at your struggling readers in your classrooms versus your advanced readers, one of the things that's going to really differentiate them is their vocabulary abilities. So when we're trying to close this achievement gap, we need to focus on the literacy gap, which in effect is a vocabulary gap. And especially for our English language learners, the achievement gap is a vocabulary gap. End of story. So the vital step in closing the achievement gap is intentionally focusing on vocabulary across all grade levels, across all subject areas. This is not just an English teacher's job. This is a job for all of the teachers at our school. So when we talk about how exactly we should close the vocabulary gap, we need to talk about the way that we do vocabulary instruction at our school. Across the country, the most common approach is just rote memorization. Here's the word, here's the definition, and you're going to be tested on this on Friday. That is not an effective way to teach vocabulary. We actually need to focus our vocabulary instruction on 4 main elements. The first is connecting to background knowledge for our students. We need to provide a lot of exposure. So throughout the week, throughout the unit, throughout the entire year, students need to be exposed to the same vocabulary words in the correct context. And they need to have opportunities to have active involvement with these words. So if that means creating sentences, if that means acting the words out, they just need to become active in their word knowledge. And they need to have they need to develop their word knowledge, their understanding of word parts and the words in context. So when we talk about how exactly students go through this acquisition of vocabulary, they kind of just start in these first couple stages where either they haven't never heard the word or they heard it and don't really understand it. What we want to do is we want to get them to stages 4 and 5 where they know it well. You can ask them the word, they can give you the definition, but this stage 5 is the most important, and it's being able to use the word in context. Because our goal is not to have students just pass a test at the end of the week. It's giving them those skills so that when they go into college and they're sitting around a table with peers from professional families, they're able to converse at a high level. So our goal is to give them time and opportunity so that they can get to this stage 5 effectively. So when we talk about how we're going to teach words, we need to figure out what words are the most important words to teach. And there are 3 tiers of words. The first are words that students already know, like clock and play and baby. Tier 3 words are words that are very specialized, words that are specific to biology or specific to history. What we want to focus on are these tier 2 words, the words that students don't know, but they have a wide utility. They can use them in multiple contexts. And so when you're looking through a text, all of the words that you choose should be based in the text that you're reading so students are exposed to them. When you're trying to choose these tier 2 words, you can ask yourself a couple questions. One, is this a useful word? Will the student encounter it in other texts? If the answer to that is no, it's probably a tier 3 word, and we're just going to put that on the back burner. You also want to ask if this word relates to other topics that they study in other classrooms or even across units in your own class. And then, is this word something that is going to help them understand the context of what they're reading? If that's a yes, then that is a tier 2 word, and that's something that you should probably focus on. So if I'm teaching the giver, I'm not going to choose a word from a couple units back or choose a word that has no relation to the giver. I'm going to go into the text and choose a word that's specific to the giver, specific to the chapter that we're reading at the time. When you talk about when in your lesson cycle you should address vocabulary instruction, you can do it in a couple different circumstances. You can either do it before reading, during reading, or after reading. I prefer to do it before reading, so students understand the word, and that when we are reading the text, when we're at that during reading phase, I can point it out and say, oh, Lamar, we're at parched right now. Can you remind us what parched means? And then that will be another exposure for this vocabulary word. It also just depends on the text, the activity, and the individual students when you're choosing when to incorporate vocabulary. I often do vocabulary in a 4-day cycle. And this is to ensure that students are getting multiple chances to practice with these words. So day 1 is a very general exposure. I teach context clues very early on so that when we're at day 1 of our vocabulary instruction, students will be able to access these sentences that I give them. So an example is number 1. When Armand was wandering out in the desert for 12 hours, he became very parched because there was no water to be found. So I'm hoping that because I've taught context clues already, that students will understand no water and wandering out in the desert and understand that parched most closely means thirsty. So that's just our initial exposure to these words. They could be familiar with them or not, but this is how I'm exposing every student. Day 2 and day 3, I give them a chance to practice. So sometimes I'll have them act out the word. Sometimes I will have them match these words with synonyms without giving them the definition, and they'll have to recall. Other times I'll have them describe a situation in which they were immobilized, and that'll have them using these words in the correct context and understanding the meaning. Finally, on day 4, I move to a critical thinking type stage, where I'm giving them situations and I'm giving them sentences that they have to tell me whether or not these vocabulary words are used in the correct context. Because the worst thing is for a student to gain the knowledge of the vocabulary definition and then misuse them continuously because they don't understand how to use them correctly. So I will purposely come up with situations that can be easily debated so that we can really get to the bottom of whether or not students understand the meaning of these words. My goal in this is not necessarily to get a right or wrong answer. So an example is number 2. It says, when I'm very optimistic, I falter with every word that I say. I would argue that that's a false statement because when you're hopeful, when you're feeling really positive, you're more confident and you wouldn't falter with your words. Some students argue that if you're really hopeful, you're really excited about something, you'll stumble over your words constantly because you're so excited. In that situation, I wouldn't necessarily argue right or wrong with them. I can tell that they're understanding the meaning of these words based on the argument that they're giving for the rest of the class. So ultimately, what you want to do is you want to give them enough exposure to this, and then on Friday I will give them an assessment. But next week, I will incorporate these words into the PDN, into their homework, so that they're being exposed over and over to them throughout the entire unit. And then at the end of the unit, I'll have them do something creative to show that they can use these words in context, because that's my number 1 goal. So what I want us to do right now is you have some text in front of you, and I want us to go through the process of finding those tier 2 words, the words that are going to be most useful, that are going to have a large relationship to other classes. And then once we get to that point, we'll go into how you would want to address these in your lesson and how you could build this 4-day cycle in your own class so that your students are having enough practice with these words to be successful.